Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks pretending to run for president in 2024, possibly to sell more copies of his book, because Cenk Uygur is actually ineligible to be president of the United States, which I will explain further. Also, there is no way this man is going to beat Joe Biden in a Democratic primary. But before we get into that, this video is sponsored, so let me toss it to the sponsor, then we'll come back over here and talk about it on the other side. The US debt spike could lead to a long-term rally for gold. Since March of 2020, we've added $8 trillion to our debt. Combine that with the Federal Reserve interest rate hikes, and now our debt service payments surpass over $1 trillion. And over that same period of time, gold is up 50%. Now we're starting to see oil-rich countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and BRICS come together on deals to possibly toss the United States petrodollar, and this could wreak disaster not only for you, but for your portfolio. This is one of the reasons why I'm happy to be partnering with National Gold Group. You can contact them and talk about diversifying your portfolio in order to hedge against the potential crisis. You can call them at 866-826-2603, talk to an American-based customer service representative, and go over your options. Again, that's 866-826-2603, and mention Actual Justice Warriors so that they know that I sent you. There is always a risk whenever you're investing, and past performance is not a guarantee of future results.
Let's get into that, and that's why it's interesting. You've been talking a little bit about Joe Biden. Let's put this tweet up there on the screen. Now, for example, you say Biden is losing by 10 points in this poll. Even if it's half wrong, it's still an epic disaster. The Democrat has to win the popular vote by 5 to win the Electoral College. Right now, Biden is 15 points behind where he needs to be. Wake up.
So Crystal Ball and Sagar are the hosts of Breaking Points. They used to be over at The Hill Rising. They just rebranded and moved independent. And they interviewed Cenk Uygur based on the fact that he's selling his book, Justice is Coming, which you'll remember from my channel. I talked about how he started selling it way back in May of 2020, despite the fact that the book was not written. Well, it actually is finally out. I will be going over and reviewing the book, but now Cenk's on his little tour, and during the course of his tour, he decided to say absurd things in the latter half of this interview, more than the absurd things that are in his book. Review coming soon. And among those absurd things is that he is contemplating a run for the president of the United States. This is absolutely hilarious. It's ridiculous. Let's roll into it because they're pitching it big on Breaking Points, despite the fact that this is a complete and utter fantasy.
I mean, Gavin Newsom is the one making the most, doing the most right now, and it's very clear he's not going to jump in this race against Joe. So do you think there's a chance?
Crystal, we are definitely in a unsolvable riddle.
Yeah.
Because the corporate Democrats say, I will not disobey. I will always bow my head. Right? And the progressives say, well, I can't run. The mainstream media will destroy me. They'll destroy my life. They'll destroy my career, et cetera, right? So how do we get past that? That's why I'm desperate enough to think maybe I should do it.
So they bring up the fact that Gavin Newsom is doing all this stuff to get attention, but he's already announced that he's not running for president. Now, many people speculate that they're going to replace Joe Biden with Gavin Newsom, or that Gavin Newsom is waiting in the wings in case something were to happen to the president of the United States. But honestly, I think this is a bit ridiculous in terms of speculation, especially the replacement part, first and foremost, because I heard this back in 2020 with Andrew Cuomo being the potential replacement for Joe Biden. And secondly, and this is probably the most crucial reason Joe Biden is not going to be replaced, is because he's in an excellent position to win re-election in 2024. Now, that might be something that you want to push back on. You might be saying that the recent polling that has come out has shown us that if the election were to happen today, Donald Trump would beat Joe Biden. Ex-Republican would beat Joe Biden. But the thing is, the election is not happening today. We're not even through the Republican primaries at this point in time. And typically what happens in presidential elections is that things tend to tighten up as we get past the conventions and we end up at a virtual tie going into election day. However, Joe Biden, very strategically, because by the way, those polls are national numbers and we don't elect a president based on the popular vote or the national polling or anything of the sort, has been redirecting resources to key battleground states through the office of the presidency in order to secure union support, in order to get that white working class that Trump just lost a little bit of a percentage of back in 2020 to make sure that he wins re-election. There was a recent announcement, not a lot of people were talking about it. It was made by Kamala Harris in the city of Philadelphia, that the Biden administration was seeking to use regulatory power to make sure that the wages in red states matched the union wages in blue states when it comes to the Build Back Better funds and when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act funds. And the reason why they're deciding to do this is because it turns out all these green energy projects are disproportionately being built in red states that will almost certainly go for Trump. So the Biden administration has thought of a way to neutralize the advantages that these mostly right-to-work states have, and that is by enforcing the union wage upon them so that they don't have a competitive advantage against unionized states like the following: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Now, I shouldn't have to explain what the purpose of Biden trying to redirect money to those states is, but I'm going to tell you anyway. This is because these are absolutely crucial states to his re-election campaign, and the Biden administration is seeking to make sure that his supporters get the funding that his Democrats pass into law, so that way he can shore up his support going into 2024. You see, a lot of people in online media, left-wing and right-wing, keep focusing on the national poll numbers. They keep focusing on the fact that Biden can barely speak. But the thing is, Biden could barely speak back in 2020. And while all of these people told you that his campaign was a joke, that he had no chance, I called a year out in advance that Joe Biden was going to turn around the Democratic primary, specifically in South Carolina, even if Bernie Sanders had an advantage and had momentum going in. I said this throughout the course of every single debate over and over again, and guess what happened? And the reason why I said that is because most of the American population knows who Joe Biden is, and most of that population isn't on Twitter or Instagram or on Facebook looking at clips of him barely being able to speak. All the people who focus on Joe Biden not being able to talk were never going to vote for him anyway, didn't vote for him back in 2020. However, the general population sees him as Obama's vice president. They don't care about the fact that he doesn't talk so much. So all of these, the polling today or this or that doesn't make a difference. It's not going to move the needle. If you think Biden's going to get blown out, you're just wrong. So Cenk's panic about Biden not being the best candidate is ridiculous and absurd. If Gavin Newsom were to replace him at the convention or at any point in time, the fact that he's unelected, he didn't go through the primary process, is going to hurt him going forward because he will be viewed as the party choice. And I know a lot of people are saying Gavin Newsom's a great talker. I know a lot of people are saying Gavin Newsom is a younger, more attractive candidate. But the thing is, Gavin Newsom is not a national figure. You might think he's popular now because there is no national spotlight on him. And more importantly, the idea that he's the party choice would hurt him going forward, and then we'd actually be able to examine his record and exactly who he is. In reality, replacing Joe Biden is more dangerous to the Democrats than just riding the wave and seeing where Joe Biden gets you. Remember, Joe Biden's Democrats did better in the midterms than almost any president in recent history. In fact, I think the only president's party who did better than Joe Biden did in these last midterm elections in the last 20 or 30 years was George W. Bush, and that's because his first midterm elections were in 2002, which of course had 9/11 to the backdrop, and that's when George Bush was at his most popular. So again, people are going to tell you what you want to hear, that Joe Biden's super vulnerable, that he could lose, that it's all over for him. Look at today's polling, but in reality, in actuality, the election is not being held today. It's not being held tomorrow. It's being held in November of 2024. Also, the people who think Gavin Newsom is the be-all, end-all candidate for 2024 seem to have forgotten that in 2020, Gavin Newsom approved regulations that banned gas-powered vehicles for sale in the state of California by the year 2035. Part of the reason why the UAW is striking is because Biden's much milder push for electric vehicles has caused them to produce more, and it requires less employees to produce those electric vehicles. You think Gavin Newsom's ban on gas-powered cars is going to play better in Michigan? Get out of here.
And I'll tell you why. Because let's say that somebody like me gets in the race.
Yeah.
The Democratic voters are dying for an alternative. Mm-hmm. They keep saying in every poll, for God's sake, give us someone else. Give us someone else. If someone like me were to get to 20 points, do you have any idea how quick Newsom and Whitmer would enter the race?
So then Cenk says, oh, if somebody like him got to 20% in the poll, then Newsom, then Whitmer, all of these candidates would end up jumping in. First and foremost, Cenk, you're not getting to 20% in the polls. You barely cracked 5% in your election, even though you had raised a bunch of money from your audience in order to go into that election. You had the insanely dumb strategy in an open primary of not even bothering to talk to Republicans in a purple district when you said you, as the progressive candidate, could appeal not only to the radical fringe far left, but to moderates and Republicans. Well, in your strategy, in your own words, you admitted you didn't even bother to try, so you don't even have confidence in your own assertions. Secondly, Cenk Uygur is not eligible to be president of the United States. Cenk Uygur was born in Turkey of Turkish parents who were Turkish citizens, not American citizens, so he is in no way a natural-born citizen of the United States of America, and thus he is ineligible for president. Now, I tweeted this out on Twitter.com, and some of you replied in the comments that Ted Cruz was born in Canada, therefore, Ted Cruz was not a natural-born citizen. But the thing is, I know for a fact that Ted Cruz's mother was an American citizen. Therefore, Ted Cruz was a natural-born citizen because you don't have to be born in the confines of the United States. You just have to be born into citizenship in order to be eligible to run for the presidency. Indisputably, Cenk Uygur is ineligible to run for president. Now, by the way, there is precedent for Ted Cruz. Just so you know, John McCain, who was the nominee in 2008, was born to U.S. citizens in the Panama Canal Zone. Barry Goldwater, who was the party's nominee in 1964, was born to U.S. citizens in Arizona before Arizona was a state. George Romney, Mitt Romney's father, was born to U.S. citizens in Mexico, and so on. Now, I know Cenk Uygur will argue this fringe, untested constitutional theory that the 14th Amendment, because it has an equal protection under law clause, and it has a citizenship guarantee for the slaves of the United States of America at the time, that therefore that equality clause somehow grants him the rights to run for president, despite the eligibility requirements as listed in Article 2 of the United States Constitution. But in reality, this is just that, a fringe theory that has never been tested in a court of law, so Cenk Uygur's theoretical presidential run would involve him challenging, bringing up to the conservative Supreme Court, and overturning the birthright citizenship requirement to be president of the United States, and then he would have to beat Joe Biden in the Democratic primary, none of which are likely to happen. So this is a complete and utter joke. It's an attention-grabbing kind of thing in order to sell more books, and I'm sorry to be so cynical about it. Maybe this is just Cenk's ego going out of control, but I'm not sure that this guy is this lacking in intelligence when it comes to this topic. But maybe he is. Maybe I could be wrong.
So are you serious? You're seriously considering it?
Yeah, I'm considering it.
Okay,
and I'll tell you why.
What's going to happen? RFK Jr. is at 20%. Marianne's at like 10%.
So good job on Sagar for challenging Cenk's assertion that if a candidate like him got to 20%, then Newsom, Whitmer, and all of these candidates would jump into the race, because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did get to 20% at one point when he started out just based on the Kennedy name, which, by the way, all of his support, for the most part, except for his internet support, is just based on the Kennedy name. He started at 18%, didn't trigger a bunch of candidates coming into the race. Now, Cenk tries to dismiss that by saying that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not a Democrat.
Something like that.
But
Right.
RFK Jr., first of all, he's not at 20 anymore. He peaked at 20 for a brief moment until Democrats found out he's not a Democrat. Okay. Then he went. Then he dove down.
Now remember, this is a guy who supported the independent senator Bernie Sanders in his run for the Democratic primary, while rejecting the argument that Bernie Sanders wasn't actually a Democrat, saying that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., aka Democratic royalty, the Kennedys are just that, Democratic royalty, is not a Democrat enough, and he's basing this on his vaccine skepticism and all of these fringe positions, which, by the way, were not uniquely right-wing before the COVID vaccine became prominent. In fact, general vaccine hesitancy or vaccine denialism might have been more prominent among the left wing prior to the COVID-19 pandemic than it was before. When we had measles outbreaks, where did they occur? In the wealthiest areas of California. Jenny McCarthy was a big proponent of being anti-vax. She was nobody's conservative. Cenk Uygur is just foaming at the mouth, throwing out whatever he could possibly throw out in order to make excuses for his political stunt on breaking points in order to sell more books. And Cenk, I've already got your book. I'm gonna listen to it. It's gonna be absolutely hilarious. It took you 3+ years of selling it before you actually came out with a 200-ish page book, so I can't wait to go through all of it. But let's be real, you're ineligible for president. Even if you ran, you would not win. Even if you got to 20% in the polls, you're not going to trigger all of these candidates jumping into the race.
And Marianne got butchered by mainstream media. They made up things about crystals, etc. So I love Marianne. You know, if she could somehow break through media, great, wonderful, etc. But it's taken a while and she hasn't broken through yet. So we need someone to be super aggressive.
Look, let's be honest. Marianne Williamson is not a serious candidate for the president. You have a lot of people on the online left talking her up, talking about how she is this big candidate and should be the standard bearer. But in reality, Marianne Williamson is a significantly higher risk to lose to Donald Trump or any Republican than is Joe Biden. Also, I just want to point out that this is yet another instance of Cenk Uygur talking out of both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, Cenk will talk about how everybody wants to vote for the progressives, everybody supports progressive candidates. The whole premise of his book is that America is secretly progressive, and also alternative media, online media, progressive media, like the Young Turks, significantly bigger and more powerful than mainstream media. However, when his candidates are losing, like Marianne Williamson, when she's not catching fire, Cenk then turns around and says the media is too powerful, the media will defeat her, they've destroyed her, she can't break through the media, therefore she's ineligible for the presidency. So Cenk, either you have a large enough platform to speak to the broad progressive audience in the Democratic Party, and you're bigger than the mainstream media, or the mainstream media is the kingmaker that is making decisions on who is the party's nominee. You gotta pick a lane in this one. And by the way, Joe Biden, again, is the president of the United States of America. He has the bully pulpit. He has naturally more attention on him than any other person, than any other Democrat. So the idea that Joe Biden needs the media cheerleading for him in order to beat Marianne Williamson is ridiculous and absurd. Remember, in the Democratic primary, Joe Biden had ran out of money by the time that he was limping into South Carolina, according to Cenk Uygur. Michael Bloomberg entered the race and spent a ton of money trying to destroy Joe Biden's campaign in order to eke out a victory in Super Tuesday, where, by the way, he outperformed Elizabeth Warren, who they often blame for costing Bernie Sanders the nomination, and yet they never talk about the fact that Michael Bloomberg was pillaging staffers from Joe Biden, was doing everything in his power to make sure donors didn't back Joe Biden, and yet he still lost to Joe Biden, even with Bloomberg's overwhelming money advantage.
And if they, let me ask you this way. If you get, again, anyone, it doesn't have to be progressive, gets to 20 or 25, an outsider, right? This whole town panics, and Newsom and Whitmer go in immediately.
I do think
Is
there's
that
a possibility
right?
of
I don't know, because it already happened with RFK, and they just ignored him, and they went after him. And
that was before when they were convinced that Biden was going to win, and RFK, everybody knew was a flash in the pan because he's not really a Democrat.
Maybe.
So Cenk then goes from 20 to 25% to try to up the scale, and Sagar points out, again, this already happened with RFK, and Cenk repeats the ridiculous assertion that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not really a Democrat. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., according to Cenk, is not really a Democrat. The guy who's not eligible to run for the president of the United States, who's talking about his own potential presidential run, is talking about how Robert F. Kennedy Jr., not a real Democrat. Okay, I just want to get that straight. that's what's happening right now.
But so, Cenk, tell me more about your thinking.
Yeah.
Timeline, what are you weighing? Right. How serious are you?
Yeah.
Give us the details.
So I already thought about it before, and I rejected it because I know what they're going to do. You're an outsider, radical. They're going to dredge up things from 1987 and when you were a junior high school.
They already did that to you.
I think they did that to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's right.
Of course. And look, if we're being honest, the number one problem is mainstream media.
Sure.
Mainstream media is the shock troops of corporate politicians, both corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans.
Yeah.
Their job is to eviscerate any outsider. So that's why do you think progressives aren't running?
Cenk, you got 5% of the vote. You talked about how you were the front runner throughout the whole course of the election, how you were going to fight, how, again, the progressive candidate was more electable in a purple district than these moderate Democrats, and you got absolutely smashed. And by the way, you didn't even believe it. You didn't even spend all of your campaign money that you raised for the primary in the primary. You didn't bother to talk to Republicans in your own district when you said it was a purple district, and in reality, even Republicans are secretly progressive. You embarrassed yourself. The only thing that people can say about you, Cenk, is that at least you attempted to run, but the thing is, you learned no lessons from that campaign, like the fact that YouTube subscribers don't translate into actual voters.
I've talked to at least half a dozen progressives and tried to convince them to go in the race. And they're like, I don't want my life ruined.
So Cenk just admitted right there that progressives are inadvertently absolute cowards. He says the reason they don't want to run is because they're afraid the mainstream media will destroy their lives. No, Cenk, the reason they don't want to run is because Joe Biden will beat them. Joe Biden is the guy. He won the presidency. He's the person in office. And in reality, if you look at Joe Biden's core support, it is among older black voters. That is his strongest loyalist base. That's why he won in 2020. And nobody's going to crack into that support. They all tried to in 2020, in 2024, when he's already the president. Older black voters are more moderate than Cenk's audience. It's just a fact. They're more moderate than Cenk, and they want somebody who is a sure chance to win, and they may have voted for Joe Biden based on Obama nostalgia, but guess what? Obama nostalgia votes count just as much as radical, passionate, progressive votes.
Sure.
And I'm now so desperate for making sure that we win that I think I'm already destroyed, right? Like they've already attacked me 10,000 times, right? So come at me, bro. So Crystal, it's crazy for me to consider it, right?
Yeah.
But that's the times we're in. If literally no one else will do it. It's insane. So I don't want to go quietly into that good night. And right now we are 100% on a track to go quietly into that good night.
So here you have Cenk saying he's not going to go quietly into that night. Again, Cenk Uygur, you are ineligible to be president of the United States of America. You cannot be president of the United States of America. Article 2 of the United States Constitution says you cannot be president of the United States of America. Article 2, Section 1. No person except a natural-born citizen or citizen of the United States at the time of adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible for the office of president. Period. Point blank. End of sentence. But go ahead, Cenk. Explain to your audience how you're dead serious about mounting a legal challenge that introduces a fringe theory of how the 14th Amendment works into the conservative Supreme Court, and that's going to make you eligible to be president, and all that's going to happen in time for you to unseat Joe Biden and win the Democratic nomination and be evil Orange Man Trump or whatever Republican ultimately ends up getting the nomination.
What's the timeline, as Crystal said?
So
when are you going to decide?
No, if I'm going to do it, if anybody's going to do it, they got to go now.
Yeah.
Well, announce it.
Have you thought about staff? Have you thought about a plan? Have you reached, we know, donor networks, all those sorts of things. Have you started taking real steps?
So if you're going to run a campaign this late, you can't go traditional, right? You can't be like, I'm going to collect endorsements from politicians. And I'm going to build up my base tiny bit. No, you got to go and hope for a grassroots tsunami.
Also, I can't help but notice, but even Crystal Ball is kind of rolling her eyes at Cenk. There's points where he's talking, where she's looking at the camera. A smile is creeping out her face because she knows that this is ridiculous and absurd in every possible way. But then Cenk goes on to say that a presidential candidate has to go now, and they're asking him why he doesn't announce, and then they're asking him all these practical questions. And again, they haven't asked him about the fact that he's ineligible to run for president, but Cenk doesn't have good answers for any of these. Also, I will point out that before Cenk ran for Congress, he registered the domain name for Cenk2020.com or whatever the name of the website he actually went for before he made these announcements. That's how people knew that he was planning on doing this. There does not appear to be any maneuver on Cenk's behalf in order to do this, unless I'm wrong.
The good news is when I ran for Congress, I mean, it was a tiny little race. We raised like 1.3 million in 3 months. I mean, if anybody can raise money, it's me from the grassroots, right? And I'm a successful businessman, if I might say so myself. I have some credibility in running things, managing things, etc. So have I reached out to staff? I have, okay? Now, the problem is everybody thinks, well, how the hell are we going to beat these guys, right? So if I go in, it's going to be threadbare staff, threadbare website, and we're going to see, is there momentum? Because if there isn't momentum and people go, no, Biden, even if he's in the 20s, I don't care. I don't mind losing. I don't mind losing. You're being impolite, which is totally possible, right?
Crystal Ball's face tells more than anything I'm saying in terms of commentary right here. She does not buy this. She knows that this is a joke. And Cenk Uygur's strategy of, hey, when I was running for Congress, I raised all this money from outside of the district, from the grassroots, 1.3 million, didn't spend all the money in the primary, and I managed to get 5% of the vote. Therefore, I can raise way more money in order to overwhelm the media advantage that the president of the United States has, so that way I can beat him in the Democratic primary with my alternative campaign, reaching out to staff. I'm not looking at donor networks. Also, I'm a successful businessman. Vote Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. I'm actually not eligible to run for the presidency of the United States of America.
Because if there isn't momentum and people go, no, Biden, even if he's in the 20s, I don't care. I don't mind losing. I don't mind losing. You're being impolite, which is totally possible, right? So if that's
I think there's a decent contingent though. I think that.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then at least I left it all on the battlefield. Or whoever does it, for God's sake, don't make me do it. Like, have someone else run, right? But I can't get anyone to do it. And so I want to leave it all on the battlefield. And I don't want to say, well, like everyone else, I wanted to be polite. So we lost democracy because we thought it would hurt Mussolini's opponents' feelings.
Cenk, cut it out. Stop it. I already said I'd buy your book, okay? I was buying your book from the moment you announced it. I pre-ordered it twice because it took so long that Amazon.com/audible.com/this book may never come out actually refunded me my Audible credit because your book took so long and they felt embarrassed on your behalf. So trust me, we're going to buy your book. The amount of people who are going to buy your book are already set. The idea that you're going to win us over with this fake presidential run, it's not going to happen. Cut it out. You're embarrassing yourself. Crystal Ball's face on its own shows how much you're embarrassing yourself, and I've had enough. You're not going to leave anything on the battlefield. You're not going to win any race. You're not going to trigger all these candidates to jump in, like Gavin Newsom sitting around deciding whether or not he's going to try to take the nomination from Joe Biden. He's like, oh my God, Cenk Uygur, who got 5% in a congressional race despite raising $1.3 million, he jumped in the race, and now's my chance. Newsom for the win. It's not going to happen. Stop it. Go home, Cenk. Go hang out with your wife. Go hang out with your children's. Go back to the Young Turks. Talk to Anna Kasparian. Have her talk some sense into you and move on with your life. You're embarrassing yourself. And the fact that this is the title as if it's legitimate in any way is absurd.
You guys, and I know how mad Democrats get, and I know how mad media gets when you point out an iceberg. But we did it before. We pointed out the Hillary Clinton iceberg, and then they said, you made the iceberg appear. No, you knuckleheads, it's right there. The country, the voters despise the establishment. And they're like, so let's pick the most establishment candidates we can, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. Guys, he barely won last time. There's no way he's going to win now.
So Cenk Uygur says, oh, we're headed for an iceberg here in the Democratic Party. And look, we warned you about the iceberg back in 2016. You didn't listen. Now we're warning you about the iceberg here in 2024, and you're not listening. Now, of course, Cenk Uygur skips over the fact that he said all of these things in the 2020 race about Joe Biden and how Joe Biden was unelectable and all this stuff, and you needed to nominate Bernie Sanders if you wanted to beat Trump. And it turns out that was complete and utter nonsense. But, you know, Cenk's record is pretty good. 50-50 at predicting who's going to win the presidential elections, even though he predicted Hillary would win, by the way, and was on his show that day talking about how his son was so proud that they were going to have a girl president. So Cenk's been wrong all the time related to this. He's been wrong repeatedly about, the progressive candidates are the only winnable candidates, and every time they lose, because it's an unfalsifiable hypothesis, he blames external factors that makes the progressive lose, because if it were this alleged level playing field, they would definitely be winning. Anyway, that's all I really have for you guys today. I do want to know what you think about Cenk's fake presidential run. Do you think Cenk is going to be the fake president of the United States? Do you think that he could actually beat Vivek Ramaswamy for president of the internet? It was a contentious race the last time between Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard, but I think one of these two might actually pull away with it. Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the absurdity that is Cenk Uygur. Till next time.